Ma'am, that seat isn't yours. People like you don't belong in first class. The sentence landed harder than the hum of the jet engines waiting beyond the terminal windows. Conversation stopped. Coffee cups froze halfway to smiling lips. Every eye inside the premium cabin shifted toward seat 2A, where a black woman in a charcoal hoodie, dark jeans, and clean white sneakers stood calmly beside her carry-on. Naomi Brooks didn't sigh. She didn't argue. She simply glanced at the boarding pass still resting between her fingers before looking back at the woman sitting comfortably in her seat. Jennifer Collins, wrapped in an expensive cream-colored blazer with oversized sunglasses resting on her head, crossed one leg over the other as if she had owned the chair for years. Her designer handbag occupied the neighboring seat, leaving no room for discussion. "You must be confused," Jennifer said with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Coach is in the back." A few nearby passengers exchanged uncertain looks. Others stared into their phones, pretending not to notice. The flight attendant standing beside Jennifer offered an apologetic smile, though it was aimed only at Jennifer. "Miss," she said to Naomi, "if there's been a mix-up, we can help you locate your assigned seat." Naomi extended her boarding pass without raising her voice. "My assigned seat is 2A. The attendant barely looked at it before shaking her head. "Our records don't indicate a problem." Jennifer let out a quiet laugh. "See? I told you." The laughter spread to another passenger across the aisle, more awkward than cruel, but loud enough to deepen the silence that followed. Naomi remained perfectly still. She had learned years ago that people often revealed their character long before they learned yours. Outside, rain tapped softly against the aircraft windows while passengers continued boarding, unaware that departure had quietly become secondary to something unfolding inside the cabin. A businessman pulling a roller bag paused in the aisle after noticing the tension. An elderly couple looked at each other without speaking. A young college student slipped one earbud out, sensing she was about to witness something important. Jennifer adjusted the seat controls, leaning back farther. "Can someone please move her?" she asked, loud enough for several rows to hear. "We're supposed to leave in 20 minutes. The attendant nodded. "Ma'am, I'll need you to step aside so we can finish boarding." Naomi looked directly at her. "Before I move anywhere, would you please verify the name attached to seat 2A? The attendant folded her arms politely. "There's no need. We've already handled it." "Handled what?" Naomi asked. "The seating issue," Jennifer answered before anyone else could speak. "It happens all the time. People board the wrong cabin and get embarrassed. Trust me, it's easier if you just walk away." Her words floated through the cabin like they had been rehearsed. Naomi lowered her boarding pass, her expression unreadable. She noticed every detail, the crew members avoiding eye contact, the passengers choosing comfort over curiosity, the confidence that comes from believing no one will question an assumption. None of it surprised her. What surprised her was how quickly everyone had accepted a story without checking a single fact. Somewhere near the galley, a junior flight attendant quietly glanced toward the seating manifest on a tablet, then back toward Naomi, uncertainty flashing across her face before she hesitated, saying nothing at all. The cabin felt smaller by the second, the air heavier than before, as Jennifer smiled confidently from a seat she believed could never belong to the woman standing beside it. Naomi Brooks did not move an inch. Her carry-on remained beside her leg, perfectly upright, just as composed as the woman holding its handle. She looked around the first-class cabin with quiet curiosity instead of frustration, almost as if she were observing an experiment whose outcome she already understood. The polished wood finishes, soft leather seats, and warm lighting reflected the premium experience advertised in every commercial, yet none of those details mattered if dignity disappeared the moment someone made an assumption. Jennifer folded her arms with growing confidence. Every passing second without resistance convinced her she had already won. The senior flight attendant glanced toward the boarding door, clearly eager to finish boarding before departure. Schedule seemed more important than truth. "Ma'am," she repeated, keeping her voice professionally pleasant. "We really need to keep the aisle clear." Naomi answered with the same calm tone. "I am not preventing anyone from boarding. I am simply waiting for someone to verify the passenger assigned to seat 2 Alpha." The attendant smiled politely without reaching for the electronic manifest. "There is nothing to verify." Jennifer shook her head with an amused grin. Some people just refuse to admit when they made a mistake. A businessman walking toward row 3 slowed his pace. He looked at Naomi's boarding pass, then at Jennifer sitting comfortably in the seat, sensing something about the exchange felt incomplete. Before he could speak, another crew member directed him to continue boarding. He quietly complied. Naomi watched the interaction without saying another word. She had spent more than 20 years building companies, negotiating billion-dollar acquisitions, and making decisions that affected thousands of employees. Yet she knew that none of those accomplishments were visible beneath a simple sweatshirt and comfortable travel clothes. Appearances always arrived before introductions. That lesson had followed her since she was 24 years old, when a hotel concierge once assumed she was delivering food instead of attending an executive conference. She remembered standing silently in that marble lobby while strangers decided who she was before asking her name. The memory did not make her angry anymore. It made her patient. Jennifer leaned toward the aisle, making sure nearby passengers could hear her. You know, they usually upgrade military families or loyal members. They do not just hand these seats to anybody. A few uncomfortable smiles appeared around the cabin, though no one answered her. Naomi noticed something different instead. Near the galley, the youngest flight attendant quietly opened a crew tablet once more. Her name tag read Emily Foster. Emily looked from the screen to Naomi, then back again. Her expression shifted from uncertainty to concern. She took one cautious step toward the senior attendant before stopping herself. Whatever she had seen, she was not yet ready to challenge the authority standing beside her. The boarding process continued, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Passengers entering the cabin slowed down as whispers replaced ordinary travel conversations. A father carrying a backpack quietly asked his teenage son to wait while they watched from several rows away. An older woman lowered the magazine she had been reading. Even the background music seemed to disappear beneath the growing tension. Naomi rested one hand lightly on the extended handle of her suitcase and breathed evenly. She never reached for her phone. She never demanded special treatment. She simply waited, giving every person around her another opportunity to choose fairness over assumption. None of them realized that the quiet woman standing beside seat 2 Alpha was learning far more about the airline than any inspection report could ever reveal. Emily Foster swallowed hard as she stared at the crew tablet in her hands. The seating manifest was unmistakable. Seat 2 Alpha displayed one name, and that name matched the boarding pass Naomi Brooks had been holding from the very beginning. Emily took another careful step toward the senior flight attendant. "Excuse me," she said quietly, trying not to interrupt boarding. "I think we should verify something." The senior attendant barely turned her head. "There is nothing to verify, Emily. We have already resolved the situation." Emily hesitated. "But the manifest." Before she could finish, the senior attendant lowered her voice. "Finish preparing the cabin. Let me handle this." Emily looked back at the screen one more time, then reluctantly stepped aside, though the concern never left her face. Naomi noticed every second of the exchange. She said nothing. Jennifer noticed it too, but interpreted the silence very differently. She smiled with renewed confidence and leaned back even farther into the spacious first-class seat. "See," she said loudly. "Even the crew knows you are in the wrong place." A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. One older gentleman finally spoke from across the aisle. "Would it not be easier to simply compare the boarding pass with the system?" Jennifer answered before the crew could respond. "We cannot delay an entire flight because someone refuses to admit they made a mistake." The senior flight attendant nodded politely. "Sir, we appreciate your patience. We are following company procedures." Naomi tilted her head slightly. "If verifying a boarding pass is company procedure, then I welcome it." The answer hung in the air without receiving a response. Instead, another uniformed crew member approached from the front of the aircraft after hearing the discussion. The lead purser carried himself with calm authority and looked directly at Naomi instead of Jennifer. "Good afternoon," he said. "I understand there is a seating concern." Naomi handed him her boarding pass. "Only if no one wishes to read this." He accepted the document, but glanced at it for barely a second before returning it. "Ma'am, we need your cooperation so we can depart on schedule." Naomi looked at him steadily. "Cooperation begins with facts." Jennifer laughed softly. "This is unbelievable. She is acting like she owns the plane." Several passengers exchanged glances. The sentence sounded like a joke, yet something about Naomi's calm expression made the laughter fade almost as quickly as it had begun. The purser folded his hands. If you continue delaying boarding, airport security may need to assist us in resolving the matter. His words remained professional, but the implication echoed throughout the cabin. The teenage boy watching with his father frowned. "Dad, nobody even checked her ticket." His father answered quietly, "I noticed that too." Across the aisle, a woman closed her laptop and watched in complete silence. Emily stood near the galley, still holding the tablet. Her eyes moved repeatedly between Naomi and the seating manifest, as though waiting for the courage to overcome the hierarchy that surrounded her. Naomi remained exactly where she was. Her breathing stayed slow. Her voice never changed. She understood that every unnecessary assumption, every ignored opportunity to verify the truth, and every decision made for the sake of convenience instead of fairness was quietly revealing the culture behind the polished uniforms. The aircraft had not left the gate, yet the real journey had already begun, and every person inside the cabin was unknowingly becoming part of a lesson that would extend far beyond a single disputed seat. Emily could not ignore what she was seeing anymore. She looked once again at the electronic manifest, then at Naomi Brooks, then at Seat 2 Alpha, where Jennifer Collins sat with complete confidence. The information on the screen had not changed. The assigned passenger remained the same. Emily took a slow breath and walked toward the lead purser. "Sir," she said carefully, lowering her voice so nearby passengers would not immediately hear. "The manifest lists Miss Brooks for Seat 2 Alpha." The purser barely glanced at the tablet before gently pushing it back toward her. "You are still in training, Emily. Trust the senior crew." Emily hesitated. "But the system is clear." "The discussion is over," he replied. "Finish your cabin checks." Naomi watched the exchange without interrupting. She noticed the disappointment in the young flight attendant's face. It reminded her that integrity often appeared first in the people with the least authority to act on it. Jennifer noticed Emily stepping away and smiled to herself. "Even your own crew knows when to stop arguing," she said toward Naomi. "You should take the hint." Naomi answered with the same steady voice that had never once risen above normal conversation. "Truth does not become less true because someone refuses to read it." The words settled quietly over the cabin. Across the aisle, the older gentleman who had spoken earlier slowly stood from his seat. "Young lady," he said to Emily, "did you say the manifest matches her boarding pass?" Emily looked toward the purser before answering. She understood exactly what was expected of her. She also understood what she had seen with her own eyes. "Yes, sir," she replied honestly. "That is what the system shows." A ripple moved through the first-class cabin. Several passengers exchanged surprised looks. The businessman in row 3 closed his laptop. The teenage boy nudged his father again. A woman near the window quietly whispered, "Then why is nobody fixing this?" Jennifer's confident smile tightened for the first time. "There has to be another explanation," she said quickly. "Systems make mistakes." Naomi looked at her calmly. "That is possible, which is exactly why verification matters." The lead purser stepped forward before anyone else could respond. "Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your patience. We are handling the situation according to company policy." The older gentleman frowned. "Respectfully, I have not seen anyone verify anything." Silence followed. It lasted only a few seconds, but inside that silence the atmosphere shifted. This was no longer a disagreement between two passengers. It had become a question everyone in the cabin was beginning to ask. Emily looked down at her tablet once more. The owner-level service indicator attached to Naomi's reservation remained visible on the display, a designation Emily had only seen during training sessions involving executive travel. She blinked, wondering if she was misunderstanding what she was reading. Before she could examine it further, the purser gently lowered the screen with one hand. "That information is not relevant," he said firmly. Emily nodded on the outside, but inside she knew the opposite was true. Naomi noticed the brief movement and understood exactly what had happened. Someone had chosen not to let the facts speak for themselves. She remained perfectly composed, allowing every decision to reveal itself naturally. Outside the aircraft, rain continued to fall across the runway while the departure clock quietly counted down. Inside the cabin, Something far more significant than an on-time departure was unfolding. Without raising her voice or taking a single step forward, Naomi had already exposed the difference between following a procedure and honoring the truth, and more passengers were beginning to recognize it with every passing minute. The lead purser looked toward the boarding door, then back at Naomi with the measured expression of someone who believed the quickest solution was also the correct one. "Ma'am," he said, "I am asking you one final time to leave the first-class cabin so we may complete boarding." Naomi met his eyes without the slightest hint of anger. "And I am asking, once again, that you verify the passenger assigned to seat 2 Alpha before making that decision." Jennifer let out an exaggerated sigh and deliberately shifted farther into the leather seat. She adjusted the reading light above her, placed her jacket neatly across the armrest, and rested one hand on the window, as if preparing for takeoff. "This is getting embarrassing," she said. "Some people simply cannot accept reality." Then she lifted Naomi's carry-on tag with 2 fingers, glanced at it for a moment, and let it fall back against the suitcase with obvious dismissal. "Please keep your luggage away from my seat." Several passengers frowned at the remark. The older gentleman slowly shook his head while the woman near the window quietly whispered, "That was unnecessary." Jennifer ignored them. "If she refuses to move, maybe airport security should finish this so the rest of us can leave on time." The lead purser nodded slightly. "If this cannot be resolved immediately, we may have to request additional assistance from the gate." Emily's eyes widened. "Sir, there is no need for that. We already have the passenger information," he answered without looking at her. "Emily, enough." The word echoed more heavily than he intended. It was not just directed at the junior flight attendant. It was directed at anyone still willing to question what was happening. Naomi stood exactly where she had been since boarding began. She folded her boarding pass carefully and slipped it into her jacket pocket. Her movements were calm, deliberate, almost reflective. For a brief moment, another memory returned with perfect clarity. She was 26 years old, standing outside the premium lounge of a busy airport after closing the largest business contract of her career. She remembered presenting her membership card with quiet confidence, only to be told that there had probably been an administrative mistake. She watched 3 white executives walk inside without being asked for identification while she waited nearly 40 minutes for someone to confirm she belonged. She remembered promising herself that day she would never allow bitterness to define her success. She would build organizations where respect came before assumptions and professionalism came before appearances. The memory faded as quickly as it had arrived. Naomi returned her attention to the cabin. Nothing had changed. Jennifer still occupied the wrong seat. The crew still refused to verify the obvious. Yet something else had changed. The passengers were no longer silent observers. The businessman in row 3 finally spoke. "I have flown for business almost every week for 15 years, and I have never seen a crew refuse to check a boarding pass." A mother farther back nodded in agreement. Even the teenage boy who had been quietly watching looked toward his father and whispered, "Why are they making this so difficult?" Emily tightened her grip on the tablet in her hands. The owner-level designation beside Naomi's reservation remained impossible to ignore. She understood now that this was not simply a seating disagreement. Every second the truth remained hidden. The situation grew larger than the seat itself. Naomi drew one slow breath and reached into her pocket, not with urgency or frustration, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had finally concluded that everyone in the cabin had already revealed exactly who they were. Naomi slowly removed her phone from her jacket pocket. There was no dramatic gesture, no visible frustration, and no attempt to command attention. She unlocked the screen, selected a single contact, and waited as the call connected almost instantly. "Good afternoon, Miss Brooks," a calm voice answered. "I apologize for interrupting your afternoon," Naomi said in the same steady tone she had maintained since entering the aircraft. "Please activate Flight Protocol 7. There was a brief pause on the other end before the response came without hesitation. "Understood. We are initiating the protocol now." Naomi ended the call and slipped the phone back into her pocket. She did not explain what she had said. She did not look around the cabin for a reaction. To everyone else, it appeared to be nothing more than a short business call. Jennifer smiled with open disbelief. "That was supposed to impress somebody?" she asked. "You called your assistant because you cannot find your seat?" A few uneasy laughs appeared, but they disappeared almost immediately. Something about Naomi's complete confidence made the moment feel different. She had not sounded defeated. She had sounded decisive. Emily noticed it too. She looked once again at the owner-level designation beside Naomi's reservation. During training, instructors had briefly mentioned a confidential operational procedure reserved for executive-level inspections and extraordinary service situations. She had never expected to see it outside a classroom. Her heartbeat quickened. At the same time, hundreds of miles away at the airline's operations headquarters, several computer notifications appeared almost simultaneously across secure internal systems. Executive Operations received an automatic priority alert. The customer experience director paused in the middle of a meeting after seeing the notification appear on his screen. The chief operating officer's executive assistant looked up as her phone rang. Within seconds, a secure communication channel connected multiple senior leaders who almost never joined the same call without advance notice. Protocol 7 has been activated, one executive announced. Source? Another asked immediately. The answer came without delay. Direct authorization from Naomi Brooks. Silence filled the conference room. Every person present understood exactly what that meant. Back on the aircraft, none of the passengers knew that anything had changed. The rain still covered the windows. Boarding remained paused. Jennifer continued sitting comfortably in seat 2 Alpha, convinced that the disagreement would soon end in her favor. The lead purser folded his hands once more. "Ma'am," he said to Naomi, "if you have completed your phone call, I must ask you again to cooperate." Naomi smiled politely. "I already have." The answer puzzled him. "I'm not sure I understand." "You will," Naomi replied. Emily watched the exchange while holding the tablet close to her chest. A notification suddenly appeared across the top of the screen. The passenger record for Naomi Brooks refreshed automatically. The owner-level designation was replaced by an even more restricted executive authorization banner she had never seen before. Below it appeared a single instruction in bold letters. Maintain current cabin status. Executive Operations assuming control. Emily's eyes widened. She looked toward the lead purser, wondering whether to speak. But before she could take a step, the interphone mounted near the galley began ringing with a tone unlike the ordinary operational calls the crew heard every day. Every crew member recognized that sound. It was reserved for the highest level of operational priority, and as every head turned toward the galley, the confidence that had filled the cabin only moments earlier quietly began to disappear. The distinctive tone of the interphone echoed through the cabin, cutting through every whisper that had filled the first-class section only moments before. The lead purser looked toward the galley with visible confusion. That alert was reserved for situations involving executive operations, not ordinary passenger concerns. He excused himself quickly and answered the call. Lead purser speaking. The expression on his face changed almost immediately. "Yes, sir. I understand." Immediately, his confident posture disappeared. He listened without interrupting, nodding several times before quietly replying. There must be some misunderstanding. The voice on the other end answered firmly enough that even though the passengers could not hear the words, they could see the color slowly drain from his face. "Understood," he finally whispered before ending the call. For several long seconds he remained perfectly still, staring at the receiver as though hoping the conversation had never happened. Jennifer noticed his silence and smiled impatiently. "Well," she asked, "can we finally get this flight moving?" He did not answer. Instead, he slowly turned toward Naomi. The calm woman still stood beside seat 2 Alpha with one hand resting lightly on the handle of her suitcase. She had not changed her expression. She had not celebrated. She had simply waited. Emily watched the lead purser take several careful steps toward Naomi, each one slower than the last. Every crew member inside the cabin sensed that something significant had just shifted. The passengers felt it too. Conversations faded until only the quiet sound of rain tapping against the aircraft windows remained. The purser stopped a respectful distance from Naomi. "Miss Brooks," he said, his voice noticeably different from before. "Executive Operations has instructed us to suspend boarding until further notice." Jennifer frowned. What does that have to do with her? The purser looked at Jennifer briefly, but did not respond. Instead, he turned back toward Naomi. "They also instructed me to apologize for not verifying your boarding pass when you first requested it." A murmur spread through the cabin. The older gentleman slowly folded his newspaper. The businessman in row 3 removed his glasses. The teenage boy looked at his father with wide eyes, sensing the story had just reached a turning point. Jennifer laughed nervously. This is ridiculous. She still has not explained who she is. Naomi looked at her quietly. You never asked. Jennifer folded her arms. Fine. Who are you? Naomi held her gaze for a moment before speaking in the same composed voice that had never once risen above normal conversation. You spent the last 30 minutes telling me I did not belong in this seat. The cabin became completely silent. Even the crew stood motionless. Naomi continued, her words measured and unmistakably clear. The truth is much simpler than you imagined. She glanced briefly at the airline logo embroidered on the cabin wall before returning her eyes to Jennifer. You took my seat on my airline. No one spoke. Jennifer stared back without blinking, waiting for someone to laugh or dismiss the statement as impossible. Nobody did. Emily slowly lowered the tablet in her hands because every detail she had seen on the reservation now made perfect sense. The lead purser lowered his head slightly. Ladies and gentlemen, he said quietly, allow me to formally introduce Miss Naomi Brooks, founder and chief executive officer of Skybridge Airways. The words settled over the cabin with overwhelming stillness. In a single sentence, every assumption that had shaped the last half hour collapsed beneath the weight of one simple truth that had been there from the very beginning. Silence lingered inside the first-class cabin long after the introduction. Jennifer Collins remained frozen in seat 2 Alpha, staring at Naomi Brooks as though waiting for someone to correct what she had just heard. No correction came. The lead purser took a slow breath before speaking again. Miss Brooks, on behalf of the entire crew, I sincerely apologize for how this situation was handled. We failed to verify your boarding pass when you requested it, and we failed to uphold the standards our passengers deserve. Naomi acknowledged the apology with a small nod, but her attention shifted toward the other passengers instead. Their expressions had changed completely. The businessman who had questioned the crew earlier quietly lowered his head. The older gentleman offered Naomi a respectful smile. The teenage boy looked at his father and whispered, "She stayed calm the whole time." His father answered softly, "That is what real confidence looks like." Emily Foster stepped forward, still holding the tablet against her chest. "Miss Brooks," she said, her voice steady despite her nerves, "I am sorry that I did not speak up sooner. I knew the manifest matched your boarding pass, but I allowed the chain of command to silence me." Naomi smiled warmly. "You did speak up, Emily. More than once. Sometimes integrity begins with asking the question that everyone else avoids." Emily felt a quiet sense of relief. Jennifer finally stood from the seat, her confidence replaced by visible discomfort. She carefully picked up her handbag and looked toward Naomi. I did not know who you were." Naomi answered without hesitation. "That is true, but you decided who I was before you ever asked my name." Jennifer lowered her eyes. There was nothing she could say that would change the last 30 minutes. Every passenger in the cabin had witnessed the choices she had made. The lead purser turned toward Jennifer with professional courtesy. "Miss Collins, I will escort you to your assigned seat once we complete the seating verification." She nodded quietly without protest. No one celebrated. No one applauded. The atmosphere was too reflective for that. The lesson had already been learned. Executive Operations called the aircraft once more, confirming that boarding could resume after the seating correction and reminding the crew that a complete service review would follow after landing. The words were delivered calmly, without anger or threats. Accountability did not require raised voices. It required honesty. Naomi finally placed her carry-on into the overhead compartment above seat 2 Alpha before taking her rightful place beside the window. She looked out at the rain covering the runway while the crew completed the remaining boarding process with noticeably greater care than before. Every boarding pass was now checked carefully. Every passenger received direct eye contact and a genuine greeting. Emily noticed the difference immediately. So did the passengers. Procedures that had seemed inconvenient 30 minutes earlier now appeared essential. As the cabin door finally closed, the lead purser addressed everyone over the public address system. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your extraordinary patience today. We appreciate the professionalism and understanding shown by so many of you. We will strive to earn your trust on every flight." Naomi listened quietly, saying nothing. She had not boarded the aircraft hoping to expose mistakes. She had boarded hoping to confirm that the values printed in the company's mission statement were alive inside the cabin. What she discovered instead was not a failure of policy, but a reminder that every organization is ultimately defined by the choices people make when they believe no one important is watching. The aircraft finally pushed back from the gate as the rain slowly gave way to clear skies beyond the airport. Inside the first-class cabin, the atmosphere felt completely different from the one that had existed less than an hour earlier. Conversations were quieter, smiles were more genuine, and every member of the crew moved with a renewed sense of purpose. Naomi Brooks sat comfortably beside the window, watching the runway disappear beneath the wings without seeking recognition from anyone around her. The introduction had already been made. Nothing else needed to be said. About 30 minutes into the flight, the captain's voice came over the public address system. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the entire flight crew, thank you for choosing Skybridge Airways. Today has reminded all of us that professionalism begins with respect, and respect begins by seeing people before judging them. We appreciate your patience, and we are committed to earning your trust every single day. The message was brief, but everyone in the cabin understood why it had been delivered. Emily Foster continued serving passengers throughout the flight with a confidence she had not possessed earlier that afternoon. Before landing, she quietly stopped beside Naomi's seat. "Thank you," she said sincerely. Naomi looked up with a warm smile. "For what?" Emily answered without hesitation. "For reminding me that doing the right thing is sometimes uncomfortable, but it is always worth doing." Naomi nodded gently. Never allow silence to replace integrity. Procedures matter, but people matter more. Emily carried those words with her as she returned to her duties, knowing they would remain with her long after the flight was over. After the aircraft landed, senior leadership was already waiting at the gate. There were no cameras, no dramatic speeches, and no public spectacle. Accountability happened professionally, just as Naomi believed it should. The crew members involved would receive additional training focused not only on operational procedures, but also on unconscious bias, respectful communication, and the importance of verifying facts before making assumptions. Emily was invited to participate in the development of that new training because she had demonstrated the courage to question what she knew was wrong despite her position. Jennifer quietly left the aircraft with the other passengers. She did not look back. She did not offer another explanation. Some lessons arrive through embarrassment rather than punishment, and those are often remembered the longest. Naomi remained on board for a few extra minutes, speaking privately with the captain and senior operations leaders about strengthening the company's culture. She did not ask whether employees had recognized their chief executive officer. She asked a far more important question. Would today's decisions have been different if I had been an ordinary passenger? The silence that followed gave everyone their answer. As Naomi stepped off the aircraft, she paused for one final glance at the cabin where everything had begun. It looked exactly the same as it had before boarding. The seats had not changed. The uniforms had not changed. The airplane itself had not changed. The only thing that had changed was the understanding carried by the people inside it. Real leadership was never about proving who held the highest title. It was about creating a culture where titles became unnecessary because every person was treated with equal dignity from the very beginning. People reveal who they are long before they discover who you are, and the strongest character is shown not when power is recognized, but when kindness is offered before power is ever known.